So we come to it at last, the great battle of our time. The board is set, the pieces are moving. Welcome to my 4x4 Pelennor Fields gaming table. This gaming board was built way back before a lockdown even existed and has always been a dream of mine to create. I was so pumped by what Zorpazorp did, I knew I had to recreate it for myself. The board is an entirely open plain with a few rocky outcrops and features hundreds of corpses. Designed for only one true purpose, for armies to wage war. Today we'll be looking at the process I went through to build this iconic battle scene, and I'll also be touching on the vision for this board in the future. More on that in a little bit. For now, let's jump back to the past of 2019 where this all began.
If you're anything like me, this is my favourite scene from the films. The moment Theoden rides for ruin and the world's ending. It doesn't get much more epic than that.
Now, a lot of our boards are for display purposes only, and not really for gaming. If you're new around here and have not seen any of our previous videos, then go and check out what I mean. Keith and I have been building terrain for my ever-growing army of Warhammer figures for the last 20 years. With this board specifically, I really wanted to build and design it so a group of friends could use it to reenact the Battle of Pelennor Fields and wage war.
So in an ideal world, I could have a group of friends come round and we could battle it out on the fields of Pelennor. In order to do this, I had to start with my baseboards. The baseboards are from my local B&Q and I got them at 12mm thick. This provided the perfect foundation to build upon. Now in hindsight, if I could do it again, I would add a layer of insulation foam along the top of the board and glue that straight down. Whereas in this, unfortunately I didn't, and I've gone straight onto the board. Now the problem with that is that over time and weather conditions, it then begins to warp because it is wood. Whereas if I'd built onto a layer of insulation, you wouldn't notice that. Now obviously the elephant in the room, well the dead elephant, is the fact that the Pelennor Fields is littered and covered with casualties. And this is how I did it.
This was my first ever experience of using moulds, so I got some handy advice from my good friend Matt from Generation Shift to give me some pointers. He even came down to the workshop and we had an evening chatting about Middle-earth and hobby related goodness. The biggest detail on this board is the utter carnage of war. Corpses of dead orcs, Easterlings, riders of Rohan, shields, spears, and even a dead Mumakil. These were all made from various corpses from the Games Workshop kits. The majority of these came from the Mumakil's base itself, which had a heap of warriors on, and alongside this there were some poses from the GW Casualties box set that I used. I also wanted to try and be a little bit different with creating some custom poses myself. Using a spare set of the Morannon orcs, I started chopping away at arms, legs to see how I could create some different poses of orcs. Hours of trial and error later, I had a few custom poses that I was able to recast and litter all over the board. For those of you wondering about the dead Mumakil and where that came from, I actually managed to get my hands on this from a guy called Adam from Woodland Scenics. I'll put his link in the description below.
Once I'd marked out where I wanted everything on the boards and my path, which I designed to be directly down the centre and be the bridge between the two boards as they join, I then started gluing everything in place. Once the corpses and rocks had dried, I then moved on to cementing everything in place with polyfiller. After this was dry, I applied a layer of grout to the entire board. This is so fine and small that it applies a really good texture for dirt, mud, and that Pelennor Fields vibe that we're going for. The long-term vision of this board was to eventually link it up with Minas Tirith. Like any normal sane terrain builder, who wouldn't want to store that in your garage? This part of the project, however, is still a work in progress.
If any of you have ever been to Warhammer World in Nottingham, you will know they have an incredible display board of Pelennor Fields. I took inspiration from that alongside what Zorpazorp had done with his epic 48 feet table. I'll put a link in the description to this video. Now it was time to apply some paint to our carcass driven board, starting with a firm layer of brown as a primer covering the entire tabletop. I used the Liquitex sprays to cover the bulk of the board with burnt umber and a highlight of burnt sienna. The rocks and heavy stones were based with a neutral grey. Then it was time to paint all the corpses. Back in 2019, I didn't have a fancy airbrush to help with the speed of painting. So instead, we painted everything by brush. I had to get a little help with recruits of Keith and even Abs for an evening. We picked out all the details. This took a very long time. We're talking horses, orcs, riders of Rohan, swords, Dol Amroth's shields, Easterlings in their gold armour, chainmail and everything in between. It was an absolutely huge undertaking that took multiple evenings and weekends. Lastly, it was time to add the static grass. The first thing Keith and I had to decide was the colour. In the films we see a beautiful golden field of grassland, so to replicate that we used a mix of harvest gold and medium green to get a blended effect, both from Woodland Scenics. This was applied across the entire board. I also then used little tufts of grass to pick out slightly longer areas and patches where there would have been. The gravel pathway was joining the two boards together, and for this I just used some sand from GW. And finally, where there were areas of heavy casualties, I left it pretty spacious in terms of grass, as if it had been trampled on and chewed up by horse hooves and orcs and Mumakil. This allowed the grout used for the dirt and mud to show through, which is very effective. Now there we have it, an absolutely epic hobby journey, which in hindsight is relatively simple because there isn't a lot of construction, but it makes for a hugely thematic gaming table, and I love that. I'm super proud of this board. It's had some great games on it and I've even been able to use it at showcases and events. But the journey doesn't end here. The plan to rebuild Minas Tirith from the ground up is still a dream of mine, and we hope to make that happen in the not too distant future. For now, let me know what you think of this video in the comments below and give it a huge thumbs up.
If you've enjoyed this video, smash that subscribe button, it really means a lot. I'm trying to build a community of people that are passionate about Middle-earth here on this channel. And there's plenty more to come going into 2023. We're really excited about showing you what we've got coming up. So stick around, and until then, I'll see you in the next video.